Hi there, my name is Lesley. I'm a mum of 4 grown-up children in their 20s and 30s and a grandma to some gorgeous grandchildren. I've been a pastor's wife in Manchester for about 33 years now, and I'm also an artist and a curator. But my story changed about 3 years ago now when I became unwell and was diagnosed with cancer. Stage 4 ovarian cancer, the one all women don't want to hear. And I've been having a long journey with sickness over the past 3 years, and I've been learning lots from God. As I say, I'm an artist and a curator, and I find that in my prayer times, I find it easier to listen to God using images and poetry and to help back up my understanding of scripture. He often gives me pictures, so I'm going to use some pictures, some photographs and some artworks to help explain to you my testimony at this time. I'm going to be talking a little bit about wrestling with God and how about courage and vulnerability through a journey of suffering. One of my first images that I'd like to share with you is of my favourite place. And now at the moment we're in lockdown. I've been in lockdown now for 9 weeks. I've been unable to go to my place where I go. For the last 3 years I've gone for at least twice a week to sit under a tree by a small lake in a park called Dunham. And my tree is a tree that's leaning. It's a tree that leans over into the water. It's a tree that looks as if it's about to fall and about to break. And to me, it speaks of vulnerability because it's sat by the waters. It's sat by the living waters. And the first Psalm 1, talks about being a tree planted by still waters. So I go and sit by that tree and I pray. And one of the things I've noticed before lockdown was in the winter, all the branches of the trees are bare and open to the elements, and you can see the full structure of the trees. You can see every single branch, every single, the structure of them all. And when you look at the young saplings, they look complete and they look fresh and there's no broken branches in them, but they're only small and they're only young. Whereas I noticed that sitting beneath the large tree, my large tree and other large trees in that area of Dunham Park, every single tree that I looked at had experienced some brokenness from the storms and from the wind. It lost a branch, there were scars on it. And I learned to see that trees in the summer, the biggest and the largest trees in the summer that provide shelter for the animals, that provide beautiful colour for us, that seem full and bursting with life and are full of blossom and are full of fruit in the summer and in the autumn months. But actually, when we see them stripped bare in the winter, we can see that to become that full and that beautiful, they actually need to have experienced an element of brokenness. And that's what God was talking to me about allowing the brokenness in my life, because actually he was teaching me to be something more beautiful, to be something fuller of his love and his life and his colour. What I noticed about the trees also just before lockdown was that they were obviously late winter, early spring branches, that when I walked there, they were still bare, they looked empty, but I knew the promise of spring was coming. And when I looked really closely, although the branches looked dead, you could just begin to see at the edges of them life beginning to emerge. Leaves were about to burst forth, blossom was about to come. So even though you couldn't see it, there's a knowledge in us that in times of darkness and in times of emptiness, in times of brokenness and vulnerability, the promise of new life bursting forth is always there. We see it year after year. And I often think that nature is our second Bible, actually. It's our second way of knowing the truth of God, because a lot of things that God created in nature are then reflected in the Bible. There's a beautiful poem by David Wagner, and it says, "Stand still, the trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger." I find that really powerful, because where I am now is not where I would want to be. Where I am now is in a difficult place. Where I've been in the last 3 years is a very difficult place, a place nobody wants to be, a place where you're told your life here in this world is probably very limited. But you need to accept that when darkness comes, when difficult times come, and particularly through this time of lockdown and our fears around coronavirus, this poem speaks to us that we must welcome where we are, and we must treat it as a powerful stranger, because these dark times, these times of difficulty can teach us so much. So this stranger, when we welcome it and when we embrace it, can teach us so much more about God, rather than try to push it away and rush on from it. Yeah, one of the things I have learnt is important in a journey of suffering and growth is that in the wrestling, it's all right to wrestle. It's okay to wrestle with God. We have the beautiful story of Jacob and the angel that has been my most important story probably whilst I've been struggling with this. What does it mean to wrestle with God? In that story, we're told that it's okay, that it was good and right for Jacob to meet with God and to wrestle with him. What always surprises me is that when we talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Jacob is mentioned as one of the most important and significant people in the Bible, and yet he didn't do life very well. And then he fought and he wrestled with God and he argued with God. And a lot of the Psalms we notice are in that way. They're full of arguing, they're full of lament, they're full of being honest. So what I found is through a journey of difficulty is one of the best things to do is to name the place of fear where you are. And not to be frightened of telling God exactly how you feel, of declaring what fear is, what it really is that frightens you. Don't feel as if you have to speak good words to God, just the right and holy ones, but really be honest and real with him. State exactly how you feel. Journal your prayers. Speak them out. I find journaling really helpful because it gets it out of my mind and my thoughts and onto a paper, so I feel as if they have gone to God. When I'm feeling as if there's a blank ceiling above me, being able to write them out really helps. Also, speaking them out loud sometimes just feels as if they're going somewhere. And weeping, I have wept so much in the last few years, and I have sat and knelt on the floor in my home. I've sat on the floor beneath my tree in Dunham, and I have wept and I have wept, and I've asked God all the questions. Why me? Why is this happening to our family? What have I done wrong? Is there something I can do to put right so that you will heal me? I've gone through tears over chemotherapy, my sickness, how I feel. It's okay to be real and honest with God and to tell him how rough you're feeling. It's okay to be frightened. It's okay to lament. Lament is one of the most important things in the Bible. In fact, 2/3 of the Psalms are about lamenting. And I've learnt that I don't have to be okay all the time, that I am allowed to be really real with God. I can't stay in that negative sense of lament and complaint. I can be honest and real in that, and then I choose to choose life. And I want to look at that story of Jacob and the angel. I went to London to see a sculpture by Jacob Epstein of Jacob and the angel. It's such an important, beautiful piece for me. I actually went and sat in the room and just sat on the floor for an hour and a half, walked round and round and sat in different places to examine the sculpture, to see what I could learn from it, because I felt God was calling me to wrestle with him. My normal way of praying, I suppose as a young girl being brought up in a Christian family in the 60s and 70s, was to be taught the words of Mary, be it unto me according to your will. I was taught to be submissive, to accept whatever came my way, and just to be obedient and to serve. But what I found God saying to me during this time was, I don't want you just to be passive. I actually want you to change your way of doing faith, and I want you to begin to really wrestle with me. I want you to tell me, what do you want? I want you to tell me Do you want to live or do you want to die? Is life worth fighting for? What do you really, really want of me? Can you wrestle with me all night long? So I began to sit and look at that sculpture, and I noticed a number of things from that. It's carved out of marble from one solid rock, and when you look at it, it's very beautiful. Jacob is a large character, but the angel is even larger, and the angel has his arms wrapped around Jacob. I think the sculpture is taken towards the end of the night after Jacob has wrestled and shared and shouted and told God exactly how he was thinking. And I think it comes just before the moment in the passage when it says that Jacob says to God, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that's the challenge. I think the sculpture shows that at that point, after all that fighting, all that wrestling, the angel or God, the presence of God, had at any point known that he could finish that wrestling match with Jacob. He could have lifted Jacob up and said to him, just like a parent does with a child, lifted him up in his arms and let him wriggle and kick and scream and shout. But God didn't. God knew that sometimes it's important for us to really wrestle, to really know what it is that we're fighting for, to really know what it is that we want, to really know and be willing to get to a place of coming to the end of ourselves and saying, Lord, your will be done to me, whatever that is, because I want to be blessed. I want to live out everything that you have ordained to happen in my life. And what I noticed was that God's arms were wrapped so tightly around Jacob in this sculpture. Jacob was not quite lifted off the ground, but he was being supported and held. That all the time he was struggling and fighting, God was holding him and wrapped around him. But what I also noticed in this sculpture was that the angel was trying to capture Jacob's gaze, but Jacob actually was looking heavenward. He was looking aside, and he was uncomfortable at looking straight into the angel's eyes. And I felt God challenged me with that are you willing to capture my gaze through your suffering, through your fear, through your anxiety and your anger and your questions? Are you really willing to look me in the face, capture my gaze, and let me speak to you? And I think what I found was I was actually quite scared of that, because if I thought I really looked God in the eye, he might tell me something that I didn't want to hear. Something this journey is teaching me is that we need to find God within our fears. That's what the wrestling is all about. Wrestling is not giving up. Wrestling is persevering. Wrestling is about endurance, faithful endurance, being honest, as I've said before, in your prayers, being faithful endurance. It's finding the calm at the centre of the storm, but you can't find that calm until you have fought your way through the storm. And that is what the wrestling is. And sometimes that storm goes on for hours and hours, as it did with Jacob. And in my case, years now. And for many of you, I'm sure you have experienced suffering and pain and fear for many, many years. And I think one of the things that we find is that too often we're actually frightened of fear itself. I'm frightened of being frightened. And sometimes when we face our fears, when we're really vulnerable, we begin to make sense of them and our fears become conquered. Cancer forces you to face my biggest fear, face existential dread, the fear of dying. It forces us to, as Mary did, remain and stay with Jesus at a time of difficulty, and to befriend, in a sense, the shadow of death. What I'm learning from the story of Jacob and the angel is that in my wrestling with God, he can hold me. He can hold me whilst I wrestle, and he can cope with my fears, he can cope with my questions, he can cope with my anxieties. In fact, he likes me to be honest and real with him, because as I'm honest and real with him, I am beginning to capture his gaze. I am beginning to be real with him. I'm not trying to pretend to be somebody I'm not. I am giving up on the need to present myself in a particular way, not just to him, but to others. I'm giving up my need to make a difference to life and to others, and just to surrender myself to receive the blessing from him. In the story of Jacob, at the end of the night, as dawn begins to break, the presence of God, or the angel, tells Jacob that it's time to stop. And he reaches down and he touches Jacob's hip and dislocates his hip so that Jacob is left with a permanent limp. And in the midst of the pain of that, having been exhausted all night and now having been struck down with a permanent injury, Jacob still holds on and refuses to let go of God and says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And blessing in their culture, blessing in the Old Testament is really important, because blessing means that you carry down and you receive the name given to you from your family name. It's passed down to you, the call on your life. And in this story, Jacob is asked what his name is. And Jacob's name was heel, because he came out grabbing onto the heel of his brother Esau. And Jacob was known to be a schemer. He was known to have made mistakes. But God at that point said to Jacob, I'm going to change your name. You are no longer Jacob, but you are Israel. And he called him then to be the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So when we are suffering and when we call out to God and we, like Jacob, say, I will not let you go, Lord, until you bless me. Doesn't matter what I'm going through, I'm going to keep persisting. I'm going to keep holding on. I'm going to keep wrestling. I'm going to keep being real. I'm going to keep praying. I'm going to keep persevering, because I will not let go of you until you have blessed me, until you have given me the name of the fullness of everything that you created me to be, that I will hold on to every second and every ounce of my life until I have fulfilled the calling that you placed on my life when you gave birth to me, when you brought me into this world. So that is my prayer for myself, and that is my prayer for you, that you will continue through this crisis, through this pandemic and onwards, that you will continue to wrestle with God, that you will not let go of the presence of God. You will not let go, no matter how much pain, no matter how much suffering. You will keep being honest with him, and you will cry out, Lord, I will not let go of you until you have blessed me. And then you listen and you receive the blessing that God has over your life, the word that he wants to give you at this time, the name that he wants to call over you. So can I ask that perhaps in the coming week that you spend time writing out your own prayer, your own psalm, that includes the lament, that includes your questions, your pain, your anxiety, that it asks you your questions to God. It spells everything out, and then it also speaks back into this but and yet. I will not let go. I trust in God. I will not let you go, Lord, until you bless me. And then you listen and ask God to tell you what is his word of blessing over you as you seek to capture his gaze and come face to face. What is the word that he is going to promise over you that you can hold on to through this season, and that you can walk into the next season after this pandemic with a new name, with a new promise, and with a new hope. I hope that helps you. It's what I've been clinging to, and it's what God's been teaching me through a very difficult time. And I continue to hold on and hope for life in all its fullness, despite the fact that I, like Jacob, continue to walk with a limp. So may I bless you all. Thank you for listening, and may God keep you and your families well through this time. God bless. Bye-bye.